Welcome to Rewatch-and-Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Merlin Season 2, Episode 1, The Curse of Cornelius Sagan. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief reminder of what happens within this episode. So we start with some workers digging underneath the castle, which annoys Arthur because it's keeping him awake, so he sends Merlin down to check it out. While Merlin is on his way down, the diggers unearth a tomb and see the riches in it. However, one of them does set off a booby trap, and basically the rest go running, leaving Merlin to kind of investigate on his own, where he finds one of them dead and a weird glowing jewel on the middle of the coffin. Gaius, Uther, Arthur are all then called down, and they look at the tomb. And Uther basically pats his own back that he knew there was treasure to be found under Camelot. And meanwhile, in the local pub, we have one of the workers speaking to a man named Cedric about how he had found, a really big jewel and tons of gold and other smaller jewels. And Cedric is like, wow, that's amazing. How do you think I might be able to get in there? And this worker, of course, tells him that, oh, it's locked up. Only person with the key is Prince Arthur, and he keeps it on him all the time, and the only person who has access to his chambers is his personal servant. So Cedric proceeds to, for the first half of the episode, one after another, sabotage Merlin in his job and basically usurp his role as a servant. Merlin isn't technically fired, but he's kind of put aside, and Cedric kind of takes over the role, with Arthur trusting him more because of his competence than he does Merlin, who he's gone through the entire events of season 1 with. And Merlin is basically shunted aside, and Cedric takes advantage of having finally gotten Merlin sort of kicked out, but not officially fired, to steal the key when putting Arthur to bed. And he goes down and he starts to load up a bag with the gold, with like little rubies and diamonds. And then he sees the giant heart-shaped glowing blue gem on the casket, and he pries it out. However, based on Gaius's research that he's done, anyone who takes the heart will end up possessed by the soul of Cornelius Sagan, whose tomb it is, as he has a hate on for Camelot and the royalty specifically, because Cornelius Sagan was a sorcerer who helped to build Camelot. However, because the king of the time thought he was getting a little bit too powerful, he decided to axe the competition and execute him. And by doing so, basically made Cornelius Sagan swear revenge should he ever get the opportunity, and Cedric happily gives him the opportunity here. So Merlin, of course, goes to the tomb, or hears about the tomb being broken into, realizes the only other person besides him who would have had access was Cedric, goes to warn Arthur, but Cornelius, who has already possessed Cedric, is playing the faithful servant, and Merlin is instead put into jail. And then, of course, that night, Cornelius goes up onto the ramparts, the wall, top of a tower, whatever. I don't know the technical name, to be honest, but my instinct says rampart, but could be wrong. Anyways, he goes up to a place where he has a view and is out in the open, and he says a spell which awakens all of Camelot's gargoyles to basically start attacking the town. Once the attack occurs, there's obviously a lot of injured, a lot of wounded people, a lot of deceased villagers, and Arthur and his group basically have to try to fight them off, while Morgana and Guinevere help with the ill and injured in a hall that's been set aside to be like a makeshift medical ward, and Gaius is there as well. Merlin, hearing all the banging, breaks out, goes to Gaius all sneaky like and says, I need to defeat this guy. And Gaius is like, this guy is immortal. He's too powerful for you. But you know who can help you? That dragon that you swore never to see again or speak to again, who you don't trust at all. He's the one. He's going to help you. Merlin reluctantly goes to see him and is basically pressed into a corner to make a promise to one day free the dragon. And in exchange, he is gifted the knowledge that he needs to be able to defeat Cornelius. We then have Merlin making it back up to the surface. He blows up one of the gargoyles before it can harm Arthur, who is already unconscious. And then from the mists, we see Cornelius walking out, and he basically is like, wow, I didn't know you were powerful. I thought you were a bumbling buffoon. How about you join me and we can rule over everybody together? And Merlin is like, nope, I'd rather serve a good person and be completely overlooked than to rule by the side of an evil person. And Cornelius decides that, you know what, Merlin's power is so appealing, he'll make it his. He attempts to possess Merlin, however, because of the knowledge gifted by the dragon, Merlin is able to seal him back into his little jewel heart. And then Gaius comes out looking for Merlin, and he holds up the jewel. Everybody's happy. We then have Gaius, letting him know that he's never going to receive any thanks for it, but made him a very nice stew as thanks. While Uther is basically doubling down. Look how right I was. Magic is so evil. We have to redouble our efforts on eradicating it completely from the kingdom, which is a good setup for future episodes, I think. And then we have basically Arthur not able to admit that he was maybe wrong about Merlin, who decides to basically drop all of his armor on Merlin to clean, and this is where we end our episode. So now it's time to rank the episode. As a reminder, on this channel, we rank on our mostly objective ranking list, which we don't apply emotion, we apply set ranking values. However, bias and judgment still apply as I am deciding what values apply to the episode, which is why it is mostly objective. And then the personal ranking, which is emotion based and just my personal thoughts and opinion on the episode. So as always, we start with our mostly objective rank values, and I highlighted those I felt applied to this episode. So we first start off with our single episode supporting character introduction, which is Cedric / Cornelius Segun, because obviously he does get possessed halfway through the episode, but same actor, both characters, only counts for 1 point. We then get our world building, which is worth 4 points, bringing us to 5. And the world building aspect is the fact that dragon breath can apparently impart knowledge. When Merlin reluctantly goes to visit the dragon that he does not trust or like anymore, after being basically pushed into a corner to make a promise to free the dragon one day, the dragon basically breathes on him, and it's like this very misty breath, and then we see Merlin's eyes glowing gold, and he suddenly has been imparted with the knowledge on how to defeat Cornelius Sagan. I guess also the fact that souls can be stored in jewels with magic to allow future possession is also a bit of world building, but I feel like that's more of a one-off than a actual building block of the world, so it's not worth points. The dragon breath imparting knowledge, though, worth the 4 points. And then we have one last 4 points, which is that overall I felt like the plot concept was very strong. They didn't do a lot with the characters so much, but I do think that they did a lot with like the effects, with the battle, with like starting with a bang. First part of the episode wasn't as fond of, but basically from the point of possession onwards, I thought it was a really good episode. I liked that he got possessed. I like his feathered outfit. I like all the misty effects. I like that he brought the gargoyles to life because he did help to build Camelot, literally. So, of course, the gargoyles, he probably made them, you know, whenever Camelot was founded. I don't know how many, whether that's centuries or decades ago, but definitely part of that founding era. I like all of the chaos surrounding the gargoyles attacking, that they need to have a whole medical ward in the castle, how every character is kind of doing their part. But like I said, I didn't feel like they did a lot necessarily with the characters as far as growth or development, but we basically got a reminder of who everybody was and what roles they were taking on. You know, Morgana had her nightmares. Morgana's stepping out of her role as the king's ward to help in the medical ward and help people even when she doesn't need to. Obviously, Arthur reestablished as our warrior type. He's out fighting the gargoyles. He even defies Uther to return outside to continue fighting the gargoyles because some of the citizens may be in danger. You know, Gaius, with our research and him being the court physician, is in the medical ward helping out, is Merlin's guiding force. Uther hates magic, hates it even more now. Merlin, obviously, our unsung hero, the one who never gets thanked for all the things that he does, but ultimately is the one who saves the day every time using his magic. We get the dragon, who, of course, is our very selfish but ancient and therefore knowledgeable creature. Oh, we get a lot of reminders of who everybody is, that's for sure, like I said. And so overall, I felt like it was a very good reminder of who everybody is without going through a recap option. I liked all the action that was in it. I liked that they weren't afraid to leave a bunch of bodies scattered around. The soul moving effects, the misting effects were all really good. Battle effects have not improved, which I'll talk about later. But overall, at least the second half, incredibly strong concept for an episode, especially the gargoyles being brought to life. I loved that aspect. And so that brought us to 9. However, obviously there is one negative, which is our negative messaging and behavior. And this, of course, is sabotaging someone to steal their job. Not cool. But also being a thief and breaking into a secured location filled with items that can be stolen and then actively stealing them until you end up possessed. Also, very bad behavior. I think that goes without saying. And so ultimately, after all of that, the score for this episode, the premiere of season 2, is a 7 out of 10. And so we come to our season 2 ranking so far. On our mostly objective ranking, we have The Curse of Cornelius Zagan. As it is the premiere episode, it is the only one on the list so far. Which now, of course, brings us to our season 2 rankings for the personal ranking. And there were a couple things. So, first half of the episode, there were some instances of secondhand embarrassment. As a sufferer of secondhand embarrassment, I don't like being embarrassed in real life, and I don't like being vicariously embarrassed on someone else's behalf either. So I wasn't overly fond of those moments. There was one where like Merlin had to like get down on his hands and knees so like Arthur could step on him to get on a horse. And then on top of that got berated after because Cedric had messed with like the girth or whatever holds the saddle on, so Arthur went straight off the horse. Now, it was funny that Arthur ended up going straight over the horse, but the whole getting down on your knees and letting someone step on you to get up on the horse, very embarrassing. I did not enjoy that secondhand embarrassment. There's also another one in the stables where Merlin is put to sleep by Cedric with some sort of drug or substance, and he ends up falling into feces, and it's like, when he wakes up, it's all crusted to his face, and I'm just like, not only is that disgusting, but also how embarrassing, especially since he's standing there trying to lie that he did not go to sleep, which again was funny, but just in an embarrassing way. Anyways, he's trying to pretend that he didn't fall asleep while he has literal feces attached to his face, and it was disgusting. And that, of course, is when he loses his job, kind of, as Arthur puts Cedric in charge of putting him to bed and lets Merlin basically have the rest of the day off. The other one that I wanted to say was that the fighting effects have not gotten better. I mean, they got better with the effects, like in the fog machine. They've got the way that the jewel glows. They've got the soul kind of swirling through to possess. They've obviously got the gargoyles, which actually looked pretty good on screen. However, still, when they're fighting these creatures, they are swinging at air, and it is so obvious that they are swinging at air. Like, they do not bring the CGI close enough to make it look like they are in any way, shape, or form damaging these creatures. And then they do a bunch of like, like the cool weapon tricks, like, oh, we're gonna spin the sword around and we're gonna spin the spears and things like that. They never hit the target, and it's just kind of like, I do not understand. Unless it's something that Merlin has enchanted to hit the creature or whatever, like he kills the boar when they're out hunting, for example, and Cedric takes credit for that, but which is another instance of sabotage. But like he obviously enchants the spear to spear the boar before it can kill Arthur, and then Arthur's like, who threw that? And Cedric takes priority, but that looked realistic, probably because the spear was also CGI, like in effect going into the boar. But like when they're fighting the gargoyles, they're very obviously swinging at air, pretending that they are fighting this thing. And the fact that they look so serious themselves as actors, like portraying that they are fighting this thing, like I don't know if they knew what it was going to look out like post editing and stuff, but it didn't look right, and it's actually kind of hilarious to me. But also, there are shows that came out way before this one where the effects were better. And while like the actual creatures looked good, the fighting, the fact that they can't connect them and they're fighting air and it's obvious, once again is hilarious and a stylistic choice, but also kind of knocks you right out of thinking or pretending that it's like it knocks you out of your suspension of disbelief. Let me put it that way. We also and the fact that like literally they were swinging at these things for ages and they did no damage to any of them. That also is a point I want to make. And then with the dragon, I do think the dragon is very clever. The dragon is very manipulative. So I am surprised that when he was wording his promise that he wanted, it was that one day Merlin would release him. But he put no timeline on it. So in theory, Merlin could just refuse forever to let him out. Or until like he's like a minute from dying and then like his last dying act is to let him out and keep his promise. Like he put no timeline on it. We as the audience know he is going to be pressured into doing what he promised in the future. But technically, based on the wording of the promise, he didn't have to do that. And I would have thought the dragon would have been a little more clever as to put a timeline on it, though I guess maybe he trusts Merlin, though Merlin doesn't trust him. And you're not going to be overly inclined to release something that won't tell you what it's going to do once released that you don't trust. But anyways, I wanted to point that out. Obviously, I've mentioned a few times the misting effects, and I think it was used really well in this episode. Obviously, the fighting took place at night, and basically, once, Merlin's in the courtyard checking on Arthur, we basically get the mist rolling in, and then from it, we have like Cornelius with his feathered cape coming out of the mist, and you don't know, it's unclear until he's out of the mist. And then even later, Gaius comes looking for Merlin, doesn't know if he's been possessed himself or anything like that. And we see Merlin coming out of the mist, and he has such a serious look on his face. And Gaius has a moment of, oh no, did he get possessed? Is this actually Merlin? But then he obviously smiles, and Gaius is like, ah, my boy, and hugs him, which is adorable. But I love how the mist was used in the scene. It made it feel all very mystic. And then Gaius always is the one who knows, and I mean, that's just obvious, but it does bring up questions. I wonder how different the show might have turned out had Merlin not had Gaius to rely on. Because, for all that Merlin doesn't get any recognition outside of anything for all the things that he does and risking his life, he has that one person who cares about him, that one person who knows, that one person who supports him. And I wonder if Gaius wasn't there and he didn't have that support, how differently the show might have turned out. I feel like someone probably wrote a fan fiction about it at some point, and I'd love to find it, but I don't know it. But I do think that that would be interesting to explore because I feel like probably in some occasions when Merlin is getting treated poorly, despite all that he has done to save everything, constantly hearing how evil he should be because he has magic, and yet at the same time being the one who's consistently saving these people who claim to hate him and his gift. If he didn't have that support, I feel like that would get wearying after a while and he might actually have gone bad. Or just kind of left Camelot to its own devices and kind of went, see ya. So I feel like that would be interesting. And that's just something that this episode made me think about. But overall, like I said, second half was very strong. First half did have some comedic moments. Overall, wasn't overly fond of the first half of the episode, though. And for that reason, I decided to give it an 8 out of 10 for the first episode. And of course, because it is the only episode of the season, The Curse of Cornelius Seagun is in first place on our list. Which now brings us to our series ranking so far. And on our mostly objective ranking, we had season 1 ending with a score of 69.23%. Season 2 so far has earned 7 out of a possible 120 points. And then on the personal ranking side, episode 1 ended with a total score of 66.92%. And so far for season 2, we have a score of 8 out of 120. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Merlin Season 2, Episode 1, The Curse of Cornelius Seagun. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.